Before we delve into the chilling depths of a crime that rocked a nation, a story so meticulously woven with threads of terror and mystery, take a moment to hit that subscribe button. Join our community as we unravel the darkest corners of human nature, one terrifying tale at a time. Now, silence your surroundings, dim the lights, and prepare yourselves, because what you are about to hear is not for the faint of heart. The Whispering Pines Murders, a chronicle of terror. The idyllic town of Whispering Pines, nestled deep within the undulating foothills of the Appalachian Mountains, had always prided itself on its tranquility. Its name, derived from the gentle sighs of the vast pine forests that embraced it, was synonymous with peace, community, and an almost timeless charm. Generations had lived and died within its quiet embrace, their lives largely unmarred by the violent tumult of the outside world. That was, until the summer of 1998, when the whispers in the pines turned to screams, and the town's innocence was shattered into 1,000 irreparable pieces. It began subtly, with the disappearance of Abigail "Abby" Turner, a vibrant 22-year-old art student home for the summer. Abby was not the type to vanish without a trace. Known for her free spirit but also her meticulous nature, her sudden absence from her quaint cottage on the outskirts of town immediately raised alarms. Her parents, Robert and Eleanor Turner, pillars of the community and owners of the local hardware store, were beside themselves with worry. Sheriff Brody McMillan, a man whose face bore the lines of decades spent navigating the quiet dramas of Whispering Pines, felt an uneasy prickle down his spine. This wasn't a runaway teenager seeking adventure. This felt different, darker. Days turned into a week, then two. The initial search parties, composed of concerned neighbors and volunteers, scoured the dense woods, their calls of "Abby" echoing futilely through the ancient trees. The air, usually crisp with the scent of pine and damp earth, now carried a palpable tension. The town's close-knit fabric began to fray under the strain of uncertainty. Whispers started, not of pine needles brushing against windows, but of forgotten local legends, of old feuds, of strangers passing through. Then came the discovery. It was a scorching August afternoon when a group of hikers, deep in the Whispering Pines State Park, stumbled upon what they initially thought was a discarded mannequin. The gruesome reality hit them like a physical blow. Partially buried beneath a cluster of ancient ferns, her body meticulously posed, was Abigail Turner. Her porcelain-like skin, once vibrant with youthful energy, was now pale and waxy. Her eyes, wide and staring, seemed to reflect the horror of her final moments. But it wasn't just the fact of her death that sent a shudder through the town. It was the chilling precision of it. Abby's body was clean, almost pristine, save for a single, deep incision across her throat, executed with surgical precision. There was no struggle, no signs of defensive wounds. Her clothes, though slightly disheveled from the burial, were largely intact. What truly disturbed Sheriff McMillan and the seasoned forensic team from the state, however, was the absence of blood at the scene. It was clear she hadn't been killed there. And then the macabre flourish, clutched delicately in her right hand, positioned as if she were holding it in a silent offering, was a single, perfectly preserved white rose. Its petals, unfurling in the humid air, seemed to mock the violence that had ended her life. The news ripped through Whispering Pines like a wildfire. Fear, a sensation largely foreign to the town, began to take root. People locked their doors at night, children were kept closer, and the once bustling main street grew quiet after dusk. Sheriff McMillan, a man used to mediating neighborly disputes and chasing down petty thieves, found himself staring into an abyss of pure malevolence. This was no local spat gone wrong. This was something far more sinister, far more premeditated. Detective Sarah Reynolds, a sharp, ambitious young detective from the State Bureau of Investigation, was assigned to the case. She arrived in Whispering Pines with a reputation for her meticulous nature and an uncanny ability to connect disparate pieces of evidence. Her urban sensibility initially clashed with the slower pace of the small town, but the horror of the crime quickly transcended any cultural differences. She found McMillan to be a man of quiet determination, deeply rooted in his community, but also visibly out of his depth with the brutality of Abby's murder. Their initial investigation yielded little. The forensic team found no discernible footprints around the burial site, no stray fibers, no fingerprints on the rose. The meticulous nature of the crime suggested a killer who was not only careful but also intimately familiar with the remote landscape, or at least had gone to great lengths to avoid detection. The lack of struggle pointed towards either an ambush or a victim who knew and trusted their killer. But who in Whispering Pines could commit such an act of barbarity? As the days turned into weeks, the oppressive weight of the unsolved murder bore down on the town. Residents looked at each other with suspicion, old friendships frayed, and the collective grief began to curdle into paranoia. The local diner, usually a hub of gossip and camaraderie, became a place of hushed whispers and darting eyes. Every stranger, every quiet resident, every isolated cabin in the woods became a potential suspect in the minds of the terrified townsfolk. Then, 3 weeks after Abby's discovery, another young woman vanished. Rebecca Miller, a shy, bookish librarian, 25 years old, disappeared from her apartment complex near the town center. Becca was a creature of habit, her life a carefully organized routine. Her absence was immediately noted by her worried colleagues. The town held its breath, a collective dread settling over them. They knew, with a chilling certainty, what was coming. Sheriff McMillan and Detective Reynolds redoubled their efforts, working tirelessly, fueled by coffee and a grim determination. They interviewed everyone remotely connected to Abby and Becca, searching for a pattern, a connection, anything that could shed light on the darkness that had descended upon Whispering Pines. The local authorities were overwhelmed, and the state resources, while helpful, couldn't quell the rising tide of fear. The inevitable discovery came 5 days later. Becca Miller's body was found in a remote clearing, deeper in the state park than Abby's, but within the same vast network of trails. The scene was almost identical. The careful positioning, the pristine condition of the body, the singular, precise incision across the throat, and the chilling absence of blood at the site. And in her hand, clutched with the same delicate precision, was another white rose. The symmetry of the murders was unnerving. This wasn't random. This was a serial killer, operating with a chilling signature. A predator stalking the quiet streets and lush forests of Whispering Pines. The sense of security, once the town's most cherished asset, was now utterly shattered. The Whispering Pines murders, as they were now universally known, had ripped through the very soul of the community, leaving behind a trail of grief, terror, and an agonizing question. Who was the monster among them and who would be next? The discovery of Becca Miller's body sent shockwaves beyond Whispering Pines, drawing national media attention. The quaint, isolated town found itself under a harsh spotlight, its grief and fear laid bare for the world to scrutinize. Reporters swarmed, their cameras flashing, their microphones thrusting at distraught residents and overworked law enforcement. The once Whispering Pines now hummed with the incessant buzz of speculation and fear. Sheriff McMillan, a man unaccustomed to such relentless scrutiny, found himself stretched thin, managing both the investigation and the mounting public panic. Detective Reynolds, however, thrived in the high-pressure environment. She had seen the worst of humanity in her career, but the cold, ritualistic nature of these killings disturbed her on a visceral level. The white roses, the precise cuts, the lack of struggle, it all pointed to a killer who was not only methodical but deeply disturbed. The autopsies revealed crucial details. Both victims had been drugged, likely with a powerful sedative, before being killed. This explained the lack of defensive wounds and the ease with which their bodies had been transported. The cause of death was exsanguination. They had bled out completely, but not at the discovery sites. This meant the killer had a specific isolated location where the murders were being committed, a kill room of sorts, and then transported the bodies to these serene, almost picturesque locations for display. The surgical precision of the throat cuts suggested either medical knowledge or extensive practice. And the white roses, always pristine, always clutched in the victim's hand, became the killer's macabre calling card. Reynolds, working tirelessly with McMillan, began to build a profile. The killer was likely male, given the strength required for transport. He was organized, meticulous, and patient. The ritualistic elements, the posing, the roses suggested a psychological motivation beyond simple rage or sexual gratification. This was about control, power, and perhaps a warped sense of aesthetics. The choice of victims, both young women, slender, artistic, Abby, or quiet and intellectual Becca, didn't immediately reveal a clear pattern beyond general demographics. Their investigation intensified. Reynolds and Macmillan revisited every lead, every interview. They established a joint task force, bringing in more resources from the state. They sifted through lists of sex offenders, disgruntled former residents, and known individuals with a history of violence. The town's smallness, once its charm, now became a liability. Everyone knew everyone, and suspicion, once planted, spread like a virulent disease. The local librarian, a nervous man named Arthur Jenkins, came forward with a seemingly innocuous detail. He recalled seeing Becca Miller engrossed in a rare book about botanical symbolism a few weeks before her disappearance. Specifically, she was looking at a section on the Victorian language of flowers. White roses, Arthur had stammered. They symbolize innocence, purity, new beginnings, and sometimes, remembrance of the dead. This seemingly small detail struck Reynolds. Was the killer sending a message? Was it a warped tribute, or a declaration? They also revisited Abby's life. She had been taking a summer art class at the local community center, focusing on landscape painting. Her professor, a visiting artist named Elias Thorne, a reclusive but well-respected figure, was one of the first people they interviewed. Thorne, a man in his late 40s with sharp features and piercing blue eyes, seemed genuinely distraught by Abby's death. He provided a solid alibi for the time of Abby's disappearance, teaching a workshop out of town. However, Reynolds noted his intense, almost unsettling, passion for nature and the purity of art, often speaking of capturing the essence of innocence. The connection between Abby and Becca remained elusive. They were acquaintances through community events but not close friends. Their circles rarely overlapped. The only common thread seemed to be their presence in Whispering Pines and their status as young, single women. Then a breakthrough, small but significant. A hiker reported seeing a beat-up, dark blue pickup truck parked unusually close to the secondary trailhead leading to Becca's discovery site, just hours before her body was found. The truck had distinctive rust patches and a faded bumper sticker for a local carpentry business. Macmillan recognized the description immediately. There were only a few such trucks in town. One belonged to Caleb Finch, a taciturn carpenter in his early 30s who lived in an isolated cabin deep in the woods, not far from the state park boundaries. Caleb Finch was known as a loner, a quiet man who kept to himself. He did odd jobs around town, but rarely engaged in conversation beyond the necessary. He had a reputation for being meticulous in his work, but also for a volatile temper when provoked. He was interviewed early on, like everyone else, and had presented a vague alibi, claiming he was working on a big project at his cabin. Reynolds and Macmillan paid Caleb Finch another visit. His cabin was indeed isolated, surrounded by dense trees, well off the beaten path. Inside, it was sparsely furnished, but meticulously clean. A workshop adjacent to the cabin contained an array of tools, all neatly organized. The dark blue pickup truck, with its distinctive rust patches, was parked outside. During the interview, Caleb was guarded, his eyes darting. He confirmed he owned the truck but denied being near the state park on the day Becca disappeared. He claimed he was working, sanding a large piece of furniture. Reynolds noticed his hands rough, calloused, but also surprisingly delicate when he gestured. And then she saw it. A faint, almost invisible reddish-brown stain on the cuff of his work jacket, carefully folded on a chair. It was barely there, but her instincts screamed. They secured a search warrant. The forensic team swarmed the cabin and workshop. What they found was chilling. Underneath a tarp in a hidden corner of the workshop, they discovered a large, custom-built table, made of dark, unvarnished wood. It was immaculately clean, yet under UV light, faint traces of blood were detected. The amount suggested it was a site of significant blood loss. Next to it, meticulously cleaned but still faintly stained, were surgical instruments. And then, in a locked drawer, they found it. A small, refrigerated container, and inside, not just white roses, but an entire collection of rare, pristine specimens, some still in bloom, others carefully dried and preserved. The final piece of the puzzle came from a discarded medical journal found among Caleb's sparse possessions. It was a highly specialized text on advanced surgical techniques, particularly focusing on vascular anatomy and exsanguination. Caleb Finch was a carpenter, not a surgeon. The combination of the isolated location, the unique table, the surgical instruments, the blood, and the obsession with white roses painted a horrifying picture. Caleb Finch was arrested. He offered no resistance, his face blank, almost serene. He didn't confess, didn't deny. He simply stared blankly ahead, his eyes holding a disturbing emptiness. The town breathed a collective sigh of relief, but a deep scar remained. The monster had been found, but the question of why still echoed through the now silent pines. Caleb Finch's arrest brought a fragile sense of peace back to Whispering Pines, but the town remained gripped by a pervasive unease. The immediate threat was gone, but the horrors he had unleashed had irrevocably altered their perception of safety and innocence. The trial, held in the county seat, became a spectacle, with every detail meticulously reported, bringing the grim reality of the White Rose killer to light. Detective Reynolds, now lauded for her sharp instincts, and Sheriff McMillan, a quiet hero in his own right, worked closely with the prosecution. The evidence against Caleb was overwhelming. The forensic findings from his cabin, the identical nature of the murders, the victim's last known movements, and the chilling array of preserved white roses. Yet Caleb Finch remained an enigma. He refused to speak, offering no explanation, no remorse, just a disturbing silence that amplified the terror of his actions. The prosecution painstakingly built their case. They revealed that Caleb, despite his quiet demeanor, had a deeply troubled past. He had been a brilliant but isolated student, excelling in biology and anatomy in high school, even briefly considering a career in medicine before abruptly dropping out of college due to severe social anxiety and an unspecified incident that led to his reclusiveness. He had retreated to his family's cabin in Whispering Pines after that, becoming the solitary carpenter. Psychiatrists who examined him for the trial diagnosed him with severe obsessive-compulsive disorder and a rare form of schizotypal personality disorder, characterized by a distorted perception of reality and an inability to form meaningful relationships. They posited that his meticulous nature, once directed towards carpentry, had warped into a chilling precision in his murders. His obsession with purity, symbolized by the white roses, and his need for ultimate control, manifested in the complete exsanguination of his victims, became terrifyingly clear. The motive, as far as the experts could decipher from his limited past and their psychological evaluations, was complex and deeply disturbing. It wasn't sexual. It wasn't about hate. It was about creation, about preservation, about a perverse attempt to capture and hold onto what he perceived as pure and fleeting beauty. The victims, Abby and Becca, represented that fleeting beauty to him. By draining them of life, by preserving their bodies in pristine condition, and by adorning them with the symbol of purity, he believed he was immortalizing them, preventing their corruption by the world. The act of bleeding them out was not just about killing, but about purifying, cleansing them of their earthly imperfections. He believed he was creating art, albeit a horrific, living tableau. The chosen burial sites, deep within the untouched wilderness of the state park, further underscored this twisted artistic vision. He saw the forest as a natural gallery, a place of pristine beauty where his creations could be displayed, a silent monument to his warped sense of aesthetic and control. During the trial, a former acquaintance of Caleb's from high school, a woman named Sarah Jenkins, no relation to Arthur, the librarian, came forward. She recalled an unsettling incident from years ago. Caleb had become intensely infatuated with a rare, fragile white orchid that she cultivated. He had begged her to let him preserve its beauty forever when it began to wilt, proposing a macabre method of draining its sap and encasing it in resin. She had refused, disturbed by his intensity, and he had retreated, visibly agitated. This anecdote, while not directly related to the murders, offered a chilling glimpse into the genesis of his obsession with preserving fragile beauty through unnatural means. The prosecutors used this testimony to illustrate the progression of Caleb's disturbing pathology. From an obsession with preserving a flower, his compulsion had escalated to a horrifying desire to preserve human life, twisted by his mental illness into an act of grotesque murder. The sedative, the precise cuts, the transportation all were part of his elaborate, ritualistic process of purification and preservation. The victims' families, though still reeling from their loss, found some measure of closure in understanding the depravity that drove Caleb Finch. Robert and Eleanor Turner sat in the courtroom every day, their faces etched with grief, but also with a grim determination to see justice served. Becca Miller's parents, quieter and more reserved, clung to each other, their silent tears a testament to their enduring pain. The defense argued for insanity, presenting the psychiatric evaluations as proof of Caleb's inability to understand the wrongfulness of his actions. However, the prosecution countered that despite his mental illness, Caleb had meticulously planned and executed his crimes, demonstrating a clear understanding of the consequences and a deliberate effort to evade capture. His actions, while driven by a deranged psyche, were purposeful and intentional. After weeks of testimony, the jury returned a verdict of guilty on 2 counts of first-degree murder. The courtroom, packed with concerned citizens and media, erupted in a collective gasp, followed by a wave of relief. Caleb Finch, expressionless as ever, was sentenced to 2 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole. As Caleb was led away, Detective Reynolds found herself staring at his receding figure. The case was closed, the killer apprehended. But the why still haunted her, not in a way that demanded a different verdict, but in a way that spoke to the terrifying depths of the human mind. How could such a quiet, unassuming man harbor such horrific darkness? Whispering Pines began its slow, painful process of healing. The white roses, once symbols of purity and love, would forever be tainted by the memory of the innocent lives they marked. The whispers in the pines, once a gentle lullaby, would now always carry a faint echo of the screams that had once pierced their tranquil silence. The town would never truly forget the summer of 1998, the summer the monster came to Whispering Pines, leaving behind an indelible mark of terror, a chilling testament to the fragile line between beauty and depravity. The horror of the White Rose Killer would forever serve as a grim reminder that even in the most serene of places, darkness can take root, silently blooming into an unimaginable terror.